All right, so hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar called Putting People First, HR Perspectives on Subsidies, Staff Decisions, and Weathering COVID-19, brought to you by the Canadian Professional Sales Association. As we all know, COVID-19 has turned the normal state of business upside down. As business slows, many businesses across Canada are facing an increasingly difficult landscape to keep their businesses operating. In response, there has been a steady procession of announcements from governments across Canada as subsidies and relief programs develop. With all the news and uncertainty, it can be hard to understand what's best for your staff and for your business. Our webinar today, in partnership with Darci Taylor, founder of HR Compass, will offer some perspective on government subsidies and staffing decisions. One thing to note about this webinar is that the expertise offered will bring a federal perspective to issues, but specific HR items will focus on Ontario provincial standards. You will still find the information useful regardless of the province, but it is highly recommended to consult your own provincial standards before enacting new policies and decisions. Please also note that you've been placed on mute for the duration of this webinar, but that you may ask questions at the end using the question function. Now, just a little bit about our host, Darci. With over 18 years of national and international leadership experience, Darci is a progressive human resources consultant. Her background includes working with professional service firms, not-for-profit organizations, retail enterprises, healthcare, manufacturing, distribution, and creative agencies. Darci has a proven track record helping organizations and business leaders evolve their unique organizational and individual challenges into meaningful and strategic ideas, solutions, and results. Now, without further ado, I'll hand it over to Darci to start.
Thank you, Rupalyn. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I really appreciate the opportunity for CPSA to get us all together as small to medium-sized business owners and leaders. I know these have been really challenging times, and many organizations don't necessarily have on-site HR support to guide them through this or to really brainstorm around what are some of the options that might be available. So that's really truly what we want to provide to you all today, is to give you some things to consider while we're really moving through such a rapid pace of what's changing. So some of the things that we'll discuss today are the recent updates and a snapshot on both the government and employee subsidies and programs. We'll look at what options to consider for your team in combination with these subsidies. The impact on talent and getting through the other side of this is really the ultimate goal that we all have. And then we'll end with some FAQs, some frequently asked questions that I get. I've added a few in here, but we'll certainly open up for a Q&A session for the latter part of the presentation today. So we'll try to carve out between 15 to 20 minutes so that we can answer any questions that you might have. As Rupalyn mentioned, every province has their own standards and legislation that they have to abide by. Many of them are very similar, but it's just important for everyone to note that they will vary slightly across province. The focus of the presentation today will be primarily focused for Ontario, but there will be things that you will be able to take away, and certainly if there's other questions that we'll have an opportunity to respond to later on. So with that said, let's get started. Really, I think what I hear a lot from employers is just the overwhelming amount of information that's been coming out in terms of some of these COVID-19 updates. So recognizing that there are a lot of subsidies and programs and loans out there now that have been presented through the government, and it's really trying to stay on top of how these might apply to you and what's changing. Actually, what's funny is they're changing so rapidly, I had to update this deck last night because of this one. This is the biggest one that I think a lot of employers are waiting on in terms of getting this rolled out, which is the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. So over the last couple of weeks, the government has made announcements on this benefit, and as of yesterday, they made some additional changes. So I think I want to really point out and really encourage all small and any business to make sure they're visiting the canada.ca website. I would almost be visiting on a daily basis at this stage because things are happening and changing that rapidly. But it is a really, really great resource for employers to go to just to see what changes are happening and where you are today with some of these changes. So with that said, I'd like to take everybody through a bit of a snapshot on what some of these are, appreciating that this is where we are today. It could be different tomorrow, but I think information helps us make the most important knowledgeable decisions that we can make for our own businesses. So let's take a look at where we are as of yesterday's most recent changes. So the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, the CEWS, is the 75% wage subsidy that was announced by the federal government the other week. And I recognize that weeks right now feel like months, and it wasn't announced that long ago, but it was a much awaited announcement for a lot of business owners. So what hasn't changed is the period. So it's still retroactive to March 15th, and it's eligible for 12 weeks. The one thing that has changed as of yesterday is that now eligible employers they just need to show a drop in their revenue for the month of March of 15%, whereas it was 30% before. So 15% in the first month and then 30% in the following months. Employers would receive the greater of 75% of the amount of remuneration paid, and there would be a maximum of $847 per person per week. And it would also include the greater of the amount of remuneration paid up to a maximum of $847 per week, or 75% of the employee's pre-crisis weekly remuneration. This is important because a lot of employers have already instituted wage reductions or wage deferrals as a result of the impact to their business. So these new calculations, I think, will help to ensure that employers are able to benefit from the wage subsidy, but also help to benefit their employees who they've temporarily either had to lay off and they want to recall, or that they've already had to institute some other measures. A new change as of yesterday is that the government is looking to refund 100% of certain payroll contributions, on behalf of the employee. So what this means is, if, for example, you had an employee who had to take time off, either they were quarantined and they were paid 100% of their earnings during that period, then you actually can get a refund for the employer contributions for EI, CPP, and they would be looking to do that during the same period that we're looking at, so the 12-week period. The eligible periods in which we'd be reviewing, or that the government would be reviewing, is there's 3 periods. One would start from March 15th to April 11th, then April 12th to May 9th, and then May 10th to June 6th. So that would be the 12-week eligibility period that they're going to be looking at, and you would have to apply for each period. The one thing that we don't know yet, and still to be announced, is the timing of when the application will be available. They did communicate that it's going to be coming shortly, but we don't have an exact date yet. The way that the government is looking to have the application process flow through is going to be through a business's CRA account, so the My Business Account portal, and they'll also look at an online application process as well. Exactly what that application will look like is still to be determined. One of the things that the government is looking to do is to encourage employers to, if they've had to do a decrease in salary, is how to shore up the difference of whatever subsidy they obtain through this program. They have not indicated how you would have to attest for your what is defined as a best effort against that. So it's not mandatory at this stage. It's highly recommended, and there is something that the government will likely be looking at in terms of the application process around asking for employers to attest that they are making best efforts on shoring up the difference between the 75% to 100%. So those are the recent changes that happened yesterday. The other, there's been, certainly other changes that were announced yesterday too, which we will go through, but just want to make sure people were aware that this was, this literally just came out, breaking news as of yesterday afternoon. And certainly please visit www.canada.ca for further information. In terms of other news around this, one thing that they will be doing in terms of the government is looking at ensuring compliance and ensuring that the monies that are received around this wage subsidy, I think this is important for people to understand, that it is going directly to payroll. So this is not something to be used to go towards the cost of rent or other operational costs, so that they will be looking at ensuring that there is a compliance component attached to this, and there will be fairly hefty penalties applied if you can't show that the wage subsidy went back to the employees. So that was the latest on that new benefit. The other benefits that was already in place and is still in place, a lot of employers think that the 75% wage subsidy replaced the temporary wage subsidy that was announced previously, and it hasn't. This other wage subsidy still exists because there are some employers that will not be able to be eligible for the 75% wage subsidy. So the 10% wage subsidy might be something that they can still optimize. And this is actually something that's available immediately. So as of March 18th, employers were eligible to reduce 10% of remuneration that they pay on behalf of employees towards the remittances. So you would be able to deduct that remittance, 10% of their wages, on the remittance that you pay through payroll. So this would be on the employee's portion of the remittance, not the employer portion. So that's an important distinction to make. And it would be $13.75 for each eligible employee, up to a maximum of $25,000 total per the employer over this period, which is a 3-month period. So that has to be calculated manually, and many employers I recognize use payroll providers like ADP, Ceridian, and so you may have already been able to have conversations with those providers in terms of how they can support you through this calculation and ensuring that this is manually done through your remittance. The next remittance where this would be applicable to would be for the April 15th remittance for your payroll remittances to the government. The other question that we often get is around the interaction between these two subsidies. So between this temporary wage subsidy of 10% and then this new 75% CEWS. So for employers who are eligible for both the 10% wage subsidy period and any benefit from that subsidy would have to be applied and claimed against the amount that you would have gotten for the same period for the CEWS. So you can't double dip. So you're not going to get both. You would take away whatever portion you applied from the 10% wage subsidy, and then whatever the remaining portion is, that would be what would be applied for the 75% CEWS. But you can use both, but there are some rules that you would need to apply. The other kind of programs that were announced for businesses, one which I think many businesses are looking to try to optimize if they qualify for this, which is the interest-free loan up to $40,000 to small businesses and not-for-profits. The rules around this is that you have to have a payroll of between $50,000 and $1 million. If you have less or more, then it doesn't apply. Whether that was something that the government will look at changing is still to be seen, but this is how it is today. The nature of that program, though, is such that you would get an interest-free loan up to $40,000, and a quarter of that loan, so $10,000, is eligible for complete forgiveness if the $30,000 is fully repaid on or before December 31st of 2022. So this can be a huge advantage for small businesses who are really in a cash crunch and they need to be able to, keep the lights on, whether it's paying rent or other means. This would be where you can optimize that benefit. And this can be used for any operational business needs that you have. So this is not something that has to go to from a payroll standpoint, unlike the wage subsidies that we just discussed. The other two, I guess, programs that were announced were deferral programs, one for your taxes and the other one from a WSIB premium. So it's not that you they're not forgiving the amount of taxes or the WSIB premiums that are payable, but you will have a delay in terms of when you need to pay those. And that includes also your GST, HST, that there will be a deferral on that as well. So that is helpful just in terms of, while a lot of businesses are in this immediate cash crunch right now, to have some of these deferrals that you can entertain might help you in the longer run. But it's something that is there, and so we want to ensure that businesses realize these are some things that you can use to optimize and get you through this. On the employee side, and a lot of small businesses, I appreciate because you don't have on-site HR, your employees are coming to you looking for you to be able to answer these questions. And I would say that a lot of people are very confused about the new Canada Emergency Response Benefit, which we'll discuss in more detail, what some of the employee insurance benefits, what they include, what's the difference between those two benefits. So we're going to go through that in more detail, but certainly some of the other benefits that are available to employees are, they have a similar deferral from a tax payment standpoint. So now the tax filing due date is not until June 1st. There's an augmentation that's been made to the Canada Child benefit. And then they also have the option to speak to their banks around their eligibility to defer their mortgage payments for up to 6 months. So these are all great benefits to be able to share with your employees, but I would again encourage to share the site of canada.ca with your employees, because the amount of information that's there for them is really, really impressive. Actually, it's a great forum and resource for everybody, both for businesses and for employees. So with that said, let's just talk a little bit more about this Canada Emergency Response Benefit. There are a lot of people who have already lost their job as a result of COVID-19. And I'm sure that many of us have heard on the news how many applications have gone through already. You know, this morning there was already, you know, the unemployment is over 1 million for employees across Canada. There's been millions of people who have applied actually for the benefit for the CRB as well as EI prior to the CRB becoming available. So these are really important benefits for employers to be aware of, so that you can help inform your employees and support them through this process. So let's talk a little bit about the CRB, because I do get so many questions on this one, because this was a recent change that happened just this Monday on April 6th. So prior to April 6th, if somebody lost their job due to COVID-19, they were sick due to COVID-19, they had to quarantine due to COVID-19, they had to look after their children because someone was ill due to COVID-19. There's lots of reasons in terms of why they might have to go for benefit. So prior to the CRB, the only option that was available was EI. EI has certain rules in which you have to apply, and not everybody is insurable through EI. So it didn't always apply to all parties, which became a bit of a problem. Certainly, if you didn't have enough insurable earnings and you didn't qualify, then you were in a real sticky spot in terms of, okay, now what? So that's why they introduced the CRB benefit, was to open up, I guess, the basket of people who could obtain benefit as a result of losing income or having a financial impact related to COVID-19. So the way it works is that someone who applies for the CRB benefit would receive $2,000 per month or per 4-week period, up to a maximum of 16 weeks. The payable period would be backdated from March 15th through to October 3rd. So there may have been employees that you have, part of your team, who were laid off or let go, and we'll talk about the difference of those two things as a result of COVID-19, and they have started their application through EI, but they haven't received payment from employment insurance. So what happened is everybody where it was an in-progress application through EI automatically got switched over to the CRB benefit as of Monday. So what's going to happen going forward is that everybody who is who would normally go through EI will automatically be redirected to CRB. They're paying out the CRB benefit first. And then if you're still on layoff or you're still without income due to loss of wages, then you can apply for employment insurance benefits at that time, and it would be based on your pre-CRB earnings. So whatever you were earning, whatever your record of employment showed prior to you receiving CRB benefit, that's how they would calculate your EI benefits and your eligibility. So that's really important to recognize, because I think a lot of people, I get asked, as of recently, as of yesterday, at 6, I had one of the employees of a client contact me to say, where do I go first? Should I apply for EI or should I apply for CRB? In this person's situation, it would have been more beneficial for them to be able to get EI. They would have gotten more money through EI potentially at 55% to a max of $573 a week. However, the government's taken that option out of your hands, or out of people's hands, because they need to be able to streamline this process as quickly as possible and get money into people's hands as quickly as possible. So they're forcing everyone to go through this benefit first. So everyone will get that benefit fairly quickly. The application process is actually much, much easier than applying for EI. And if you put your direct deposit information into your application, then you can have your money within up to, very, very quickly, anywhere between 3 and 10 business days. So that's a huge benefit. One thing I will say, though, about the CRB is that unlike EI, where you can still work potentially or receive a top-up through your employer through a sub-plan, which we'll talk later about, you cannot, at this time, have any other earnings. So the qualification process is that you have to be without any form of income for at least 14 consecutive days in the initial 4-week period. And then for subsequent benefit periods, you need to be expecting no employment income. So it really is for people who have no other options in terms of their employment income. And so they're, if someone's getting called back to work or is potentially getting additional money, they would not be eligible for this benefit. So with that, let's talk a little bit about what are some of the options around that. So if somebody was already on employment insurance, they're going to keep getting employment insurance. If someone is new to CRB, they're going to get CRB. So when someone is now, or if employers are now looking at what are some other options, we've got a group of employees. We're trying to decide what we're going to do next. We're waiting for the government subsidies to come into place. We're unsure around the timing of this. So now we're in a situation of now what? So a lot of questions start to arise from employers around the differences between a temporary salary reduction, a temporary layoff, potential termination, or other things for consideration around sub-plans or work sharing programs that are available through EI. So I am going to take some time for us to talk that through because I think this is a really important part of this webinar, just for people to understand what those differences are, but also what it means when you are potentially contemplating these as options for your business and or your employees. There are certainly repercussions, and there's things that we need to be thoughtful of and things that we want to maybe think about doing if we can from a financial standpoint around how we can retain people through these troubling times. So let's maybe start with the salary reduction. So, employers, certainly there's been a lot of employers who have exercised this as an option, but however, you do need to be thoughtful of a few things. So any sort of unilateral change to an employee's working hours or their overall compensation could lead to a constructive dismissal claim. It really depends on the degree of change and for the length of time of that change. So typically anything over the course of an annualized, if you think about an annualized income, and you were to reduce it greater than 10% over the course of 12 months, you're kind of hovering over a period where, could this be deemed constructive dismissal? Certainly in times like these, and a lot of legal counsel would also say that these are unprecedented times, and the rationale for doing so is if you can relate it directly back to for COVID purposes, either you've had to shut down your business altogether because you were mandated to be non-essential, or you service clients who are no longer in business, so it's had other financial repercussions, so there's a trickle effect that's happening. then there's certainly elements where you can justify going beyond that 10% reduction, be able to stay in business and to survive. But you do need to recognize that, in normal circumstances, we would not be able to do this. These are abnormal, unprecedented times, and it makes it much more. It makes it where sometimes we have no choice but to implement some of these changes. But we do have to recognize the implications that it may result in. And in some cases, a significant reduction could constitute temporary layoff. So anything where you're reducing, someone's losing greater than 40% of their compensation, or you have to be very, very careful around what you might be triggering in terms of provincial employment statutes. So definitely you want to be careful there. What I would say about any changes is that you would want to look at a beginning and end period, be able to communicate what the period in which the reduction might take place. And we'll talk a little bit about the difference between a salary reduction and a deferral later on in the presentation, in terms of some of the other options you can think about. So the temporary salary reductions are things that people, like I said, there's a lot of employers who are doing this because they're looking at options on how to survive. But you do need to be thoughtful about to what degree and how much you're reducing, and then how over the course of the year, the aggregate amount, trying to keep it to 10% or less. The other piece that we all, or many businesses, have looked at, and obviously we hear it in the news, is temporary layoffs. So in Ontario, you can be laid off for up to 13 weeks in a 20-week period, but then no more than 35 weeks in a 52 period under specific conditions. So the specific conditions include things like continuation of benefits, substantive continuation of some form of substantive payment, like a sub-plan, things like that, where you can lay people off for longer than 13 weeks if you're doing something on top of just the wages that they were earning. The layoff really does indicate or mean that you've ceased payment, so you're no longer paying employees wages, and so to be able to go more than 13 weeks, you need to provide them something more than just their wages, so keep them on other plans. That could be even contributing to a pension plan. So there's different factors, and that would vary from province to province. And again, this would be something where you have to just be careful that you're not exposing yourself to constructive dismissal, because in many situations, temporary layoffs are not part of someone's contractual agreement. However, I will say again that these are unprecedented times, and there are many employers who've experienced a frustration of contract or of employment with their employees because they can't actually keep them employed. And so this is an opportunity for people to be able to lay people off with the promise of coming back. And when I talk, and the way I like to kind of define a temporary layoff is you're literally pressing the pause button. So you're not saying goodbye to a person. This is not a termination. You have not triggered a termination. You're pressing pause with the inclination of everyone is going to be back, is coming back to the workforce in the same way in which that they left it. So we're coming back. We're re-engaging over a period of time, and it's going to be somewhere between 13 and 35 weeks, or potentially less than 13. There are some employers that have been able to already start calling people back. So there's things that we just need to keep into consideration there around some of the constructive dismissal, but certainly these are unprecedented times, and it would be a difficult case at this stage for somebody to be able to claim that given the situation, given potentially what some of these employers are going through. What I would say around both of those elements is that communicating to your employees around what these options are and how they impact them is really important, because then they understand we're all human beings going through this together. It's scary. People understand. People want to certainly don't want to lose their job, but they also understand that there are different maybe options. So getting a layoff versus, getting a salary reduction versus layoff might actually be much more beneficial, because a layoff, you're only going to, with EI, it was 55% up to max 573. Now it's $2,000 a month. Whereas a salary reduction of 15 or 20% is a heck of a lot better than going on a layoff. So there are options in terms of how we might want to be able to present this to employees if you have that option. I know there's a lot of employers that don't have the option. They have to just do layoffs. But if you have the option to entertain either one of those, then that's a great option to be able to present to people. And the more choices that you can present to people, the better. Allow them to participate in some of these conversations where it can happen, because there's some people that might say to you that, hey, I know that I'm actually going to be impacted in different ways with COVID-19 because my children are now at home and I don't have childcare. I might need to entertain a layoff instead of a salary reduction because I might not be able to perform the duties of my position as a result of childcare issues. So there's different things that are happening, and so we just need to look at how do we personalize this with our employees. The benefit of being a small to mid-sized employer is that the touch point of the personal element attached to your employees is that much greater because you are a smaller enterprise. So the more you can personalize this, the better, and and helping people through this is really important. So with that said, I just wanted to also just let everyone know about two other plans that are available with the introduction of the CRB. These ones are a little bit hard to implement right now because they're, like I said, when employees cannot be earning any other income while they're on a CRB. But the supplementary unemployment benefit is like a top up to EI. So if someone was on EI or is going to continue to be laid off beyond 16 weeks and potentially needs to tap into EI, one of the options to look at for an employer to go beyond that 13-week period is to create a sub-plan. So this would be a policy that a plan that you'd get approved through Services Canada, and it would be a percentage that you would add on to someone's employment insurance. And as long as someone's not earning more than 95% of their lost income earnings, then you can actually provide a sizable sub-plan if you can afford it, but anything really kind of helps in terms of shoring up the difference between what people were being paid pre-unemployment versus while they're on employment insurance benefits. So that's an interesting strategy to look at post the CRB period. Work sharing arrangements are also something that's interesting to look at. This is where you potentially might have a unit or a group of people doing the exact same job, where employees would agree to have a reduction in their work week. And this length of period has now been increased to 76 weeks from the usual limit of 38 weeks. And there is no waiting period. So basically it's whatever the difference is that the employee would have been working. So if they had a reduction to 60% of their work week, the balance of 40% they can claim employment insurance for. So this is an interesting opportunity for people as well on the EI side. Again, employers have to go through an application process. They have to apply 10 calendar days prior to requesting for this to get started. They are trying to go through both applications as quickly as possible for employers who are looking to entertain this. But this is maybe something to look at post CRB, looking at bringing people back. You might have to look at some other creative options depending on how long we're looking at here. No one has a crystal ball, but these are some other options for you to consider. Again, Canada.ca is a great resource for you to go to get more information on either of these two benefits. Finally, I just want to talk a little bit about termination and the difference that we're talking about here, so versus a temporary layoff. I think it's very confusing for both employees and employers around what is the difference. So as I mentioned, a layoff is we press pause. That employee is still your employee when you lay them off. When you terminate somebody, you've triggered a separation. So they are no longer your employee. You're paying them out termination and or severance if it's applicable. It's going to be based on the province in which that you reside. And it's something where you're severing that employment relationship. Unlike a layoff, that employee is still tethered to you as the employer. So they are very different. I understand that there are situations in which employers have to still terminate employees even through a pandemic of this nature. Sometimes they have no choice. They may have to close up shop completely, and so layoff is not even an option. So you can certainly do that. You just have to remember that you still have to abide by, even pre-COVID, these rules applied, that you have to ensure that, you know, there's no grounds for discrimination in the Human Rights Code. You know, that you still have to ensure that you're following whatever statutory minimums are that the employee would be entitled to based on the province in which that this applies. You want to be cognizant, certainly in Ontario, there's mass termination rules. So if you're terminating more than 50 employees, there's different obligations there from a mass termination standpoint. So there's different things that you just need to be aware of. Certainly you would never be able to terminate somebody because they are on a job protected leave as a result of COVID. So for example, they've been quarantined, they're caring for somebody who's sick, they have childcare issues because of COVID, so they have to look after their children. Those are considered job protected leaves. You cannot terminate somebody because they're exercising their rights to those leaves. Now, just in terms of what are some of the things that we can do to reduce our risk, and wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, when I was mentioning constructive dismissal, things to help, not just even from a claim around constructive dismissal, but just how to help employees get through this, how to help you as employers help them get through this. So if there's a way for us to work together as best as possible, this is what we want to be doing. So certainly continuing benefits is really important. For someone to lose access to benefits like health and dental, prescription drugs, things of that nature, it could be detrimental depending on someone's personal situation. But if you have other programs that potentially are available to employees, it's really important to be able to share that with them, ensure that they're aware that those programs still exist. So things like an employee assistance program, an EAP, to help them manage through this. If you have arranged discount programs, you know, what a great time to be able to optimize that. So anything that's kind of creative that you have access to, it could be a network of resources, whatever it might be. It's really important to ensure that whether it's through a temporary layoff or through any sort of other change in their employment that you've had to institute as a result of COVID-19, that we look at how we can help employees through that. Wherever we are doing layoffs, I always recommend if we can keep them as short as possible, appreciating that we don't know how long this is going to last. But like I said, a temporary layoff has an employee tethered to you as an employer. We want to keep that relationship obviously as close as possible. We want to ensure that people feel like they are still part of the company that they've been a part of, you know, for however long, for years, for months, whatever it might have been prior to the layoff. But it's important to recognize that still retaining top talent is a challenge, and at any time. We want to make sure that we're keeping people as much as we possibly can, engaged as best as we can. And so one of the ways to do that is to try to minimize the time frame of a layoff. Again, we may not have a choice if you're in a shutdown situation because you're not an essential service, or your business has been so severely impacted that you're not sure how long you're going to be able to be off. That's understandable. Just make sure you're communicating to your employees so they understand what's happening. But if you can put a reasonable recall date in a layoff letter or a notification, then I think that makes things a lot easier. You definitely want to be making sure that people understand that the rationale and the reasoning for layoff is directly tied to the shutdown or this pandemic. You know, it's important to make sure that's been articulated so people get it and it's not due to something else, and that really that there's been a frustration of employment due to the crisis. Other recommendations I mentioned about the temporary salary reduction, and so instead of the reduction, potentially you can just defer wages. So it's not you're canceling, it's a promise of paying it back. So we have to defer your wages now with the idea of when we get back to normal, whatever that looks like, we will look at how we can recover some, if not all, some of your wages, your lost wages that you experience as a result of these changes. That can be either for people who have been temporarily laid off. You might be able to look at something like a retention bonus, or people who have had a salary reduction as well. So this bonus could potentially represent the amount of lost income or a percentage of it. You know, I appreciate that being able to recover, you know, a temporary layoff amount through CERB would be difficult for a lot of companies to be able to pay all of that back. However, there could be something that you could provide in terms of a bonus that would, you know, to basically say to employee, listen, thank you for getting us through this. Thank you for sticking with us through this. We recognize this has been hard, and you know, we want to recognize that through, you know, any means that we can. And really, I mean, like any means that you can. I appreciate that we don't necessarily have, we're not going to have boatloads of money at the end of this, but anything that we can do to recognize to keep people together is important. Communication's critical. So keeping your team informed, letting them know about the things that are available to them, it's huge. Taking a personal approach around this is also important. We're all feeling the impact of this. It's our husbands, our wives, our sisters, our brothers, our parents, everybody has been impacted by this. I think you can't talk to a human being at 6 feet apart without knowing that they've been impacted by this. So I think we just have to be patient. We need to be kind. It's certainly stressful for everyone, and we want to ensure that people are being dealt with respectfully and patiently, and as always, just with a huge amount of kindness. I just wanted to take a few minutes just to kind of go through before we kind of launch into the Q&A, which will start in a couple of minutes. I get asked lots of questions. I've just put a few here, just even to get people's questions brewing. That these might be some that you've had to face in your own workplace, depending on the nature of what you do. But just wanted to share some of the ones that I've gotten. So what happens if an employee refuses to work due to fear of COVID-19? Hey, this is real, you know, in terms of, this is scary. The government's telling everyone to work from home. If you can, not everybody can work from home, depending on the businesses that they're in. And so those that have to go into the workplace and do their work, this can be a bit of an issue. So there is something under the Occupational Health and Safety Act where there is the right to refuse work if an employee feels that it's unsafe to be at work. Certainly, if they have reasonable grounds, then that's something that has to be investigated and entertained, looked at through the employer. If that does happen, it's highly encouraged for you to obtain legal counsel where an employee has exercised their right to refuse, because you want to make sure that you're following the proper protocol based on the province in which you reside in terms of your obligations to investigate the work refusal. So that is something that, you know, if somebody's coming in and if they feel like they don't have the right PPE, the right personal protective equipment to do their job in a safe manner, then do they have the right to refuse work? Yeah, potentially, if you haven't been able to provide them with the right environment for them to be safe. So ensuring physical distancing, ensuring that you're taking all precautions around hand hygiene and hand sanitization, and anything else that might be applicable in your workplace. You want to be doing as much as you can, recognizing that supplies are low, but the health and safety of employees is the employer's responsibility. What happens if my employee contracts COVID? You know, I think a lot of people now, certainly after March break, there was a fear of people coming back after March break, potentially with potentially being exposed. So there was an automatic quarantine. A lot of this has been dictated for you by the government in terms of what has to happen. So a lot of it will just depend. But if somebody in your workplace comes to you and says, I've been tested positive for COVID, there's certainly an obligation that you have to ensure the safety of all of your employees. What you would not be doing is disclosing any privacy issues of the person who's potentially been tested positive with as much as possible. So if it's within a work group or a work team, then you need to ensure that others in that work team are made aware, and you know that people are taking the precautions and going into quarantine themselves. What you would also ensure that if someone needs to be absent as a result of it, if they have sick leave that they can take that's available through your organization, that's great. If not, then this would be something that they would be able to apply for the CRB benefit for. Then they would be off for 14 consecutive days as a result of the quarantine. But certainly you would, you know, and you'd have a responsibility to ensure the safety of all of your employees if one of your employees tested positive. And then what do I need to do if my employee cannot work due to childcare restrictions and/or obligations? I mentioned this earlier. This is considered a job, like this is, would be, now there's an unpaid job protected leave that the government in Ontario at least announced, and many other provinces have announced similar legislation, that if someone can't work because of, you know, school closures and whatnot, you can't terminate them. You have to, they have to be able to look after their children. So again, this would be an example of potentially someone being able to utilize the CRB benefit. So if they've used up any, you know, if they can and it's available, and certainly that needs to be approved by the employer. If they have any vacation or personal time that they can use towards taking that time off, then you know that can be entertained as well as that CRB benefit. Again, you'd have to show that you've had to stop working as a result of COVID, and this would be something that you would be able to apply for directly. So that wraps up kind of the frequently asked questions. I'm sorry, I've kind of gone a little bit longer, but we have about, I think about 12 or 13 minutes just to discuss any other Q&As that might be out there for people to, that might be top of mind. So Rupal, maybe we can open up and see what questions that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have some in the question section within your dashboard, Darci, some really, really good ones. So thank you so much for that presentation. That was incredibly insightful from an HR perspective. So we really appreciate it. The first question here is, are the temp wage subsidies available for self-employed people as well?
The wage subsidies for self-employed. Is that was the question, Ruplin?
Yep.
So the wage subsidy is based on payroll. So if you're self-employed and you don't pay yourself a salary, then it's something that wouldn't be currently in its current state. It wouldn't be something that would be applicable. It's something where I know the government is looking at all of these considerations. The Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses have been putting a lot of pressure on the government to in terms of what are some of the options for these small small employers who are self-employed and sometimes single, you know, a single independent sole proprietor. So the wage subsidy would apply if there is a salary that's being applied, but if there hasn't been a salary and you're taking off dividends, then it wouldn't be something that you'd be applicable to.
Thank you, Darci.
I would also and I would also, just on that remark, Ruplin, I'd also say to everybody that you know, your business situation is going to be unique. Everyone's business situation is unique. I highly recommend you speak to whomever does your accounting on that, because this would be very close to them in terms of what you'd be eligible for and how they you know, how your income has been potentially calculated.
So the next one here is, how could a termination or layoff affect a business's eligibility for CEWS?
So the government is really encouraging people to start to hire back people who have been on layoff. So that was the big announcement yesterday, is that, you know, start to ask for your, you know, if you've had people on layoff, start bringing them back. So the CEWS only applies to people who are on payroll. So if you've laid everybody off and they continue to stay on layoff, then they will not, this does not apply. So it's only applicable for people who are on your payroll between those periods, those 3 periods that I noted, starting from March 15th onwards. So if you don't have anybody on payroll in the first period, then it wouldn't be applicable. But if you start to bring people back on payroll in the second period, then you'd be able to apply for that second period and you would potentially be eligible. So that's the biggest piece for people to realize, is that if you have people on temp layoff, the CEWS doesn't apply unless they're on your payroll.
Okay. The next one here is, what criteria is used to determine how many employees apply to CEWS?
So sorry, can you repeat that, Ruplin?
What criteria is used to determine how many employees apply to CEWS?
So it's not the employee who applies to the CEWS, that's an employer benefit. And so the rules around, it doesn't matter how many employees you have, they haven't actually put a minimum or a maximum in terms of the number of employees in your organization in order for you to apply for that benefit, or for that subsidy, I should say. It's something that you can certainly apply. The main eligibility criteria has to do with showing your loss in revenue. And so that's the criteria. So it's not about number of employees, but the loss of revenue that your business has faced.
Okay, that's good clarification. I'm just going through the questions here. Can you explain how the top up by employers is paid to employees?
So, so something like a sub plan, the way it works is that you need to, it's unfortunately it's not applicable to the CRB, so you can't top up the CRB the way it's currently structured. If the government changes that, that's fantastic, but right now you can't provide a top up on the CRB if one of your employees if your employees are currently on layoff, and that's the benefit that they'd be applicable to right now, so your hands are tied. However, the top up is available on when someone goes on EI. So once they've exhausted the CRB benefit and they're still off potentially, then you can look at doing a sub plan on the EI portion. And the way it works is that if you think about it, if somebody is earning up to 55% of their salary, up to maximum of $573 per week, then you can look at providing people, you know, if your policy is, we'll top up by an additional 20%. So you can do that, and if you get it approved through the government, through Services Canada, they don't deem it as additional income, so it doesn't impact their EI payment. Whereas if they just received any form of income elsewhere, then it would impact their EI payment. So that's why the advantage of having a sub-plan or looking at a sub-plan as a potential solution later on down the road when it's something that you can entertain, and you potentially still have people on layoff, then this could be a really valuable thing for you to try to offer to your employees. So it depends. What you want to do is you have to create a policy or a plan around how it works. So, you know, if it's 20% for anybody who's been laid off, then that would be your policy. If you have other, you know, criteria, then you would outline what that criteria is, and that's what you'd submit to the application through your application. And Services Canada is trying to ensure that the applications are, you know, that the minute they get it, they're trying to approve it. They're making the effective date based on the date of submission. So trying to act very, very quickly on some of those for people.
Thanks, Darci. I think the next one is pretty relatable. So for a small corporation where the owners are also employees, is it better to pay wages to the owners or better for the owners to apply for CRB?
It's such a great question. That would be something where you'd need to look at, you know, if 75% of your wages that you're receiving is going to be greater than receiving the CRB benefit at $2,000 a month. $2,000 a month is the maximum that you get through the CRB, whereas if you were to apply for the same 5% wage subsidy, you could potentially obtain more than that because the maximum is $847 per week. So it really just depends on what the amount of salary that you have, that you're paying yourself as an owner. And so that would be something I would recommend maybe speaking to your accountant about, just to ensure that you're looking at what's the best option for you in this situation.
So the next one here, can you apply for the 75% wage subsidy after applying and being approved for the work-share program?
Sorry, can you repeat that, Ruplin?
Yep. Can you apply for the 75% wage subsidy after applying and being approved for the work-share program?
Yeah, so it will impact your, you know, it certainly would impact the amount of the subsidy if people are working through the working through a work-share program under EI. They don't have a lot of the details around how that would be impacted yet, in terms of how it's potentially going to work with some of the other programs, specifically around the CEWS. the 75% wage subsidy, that because they've made so many changes, they actually haven't rolled it out. It hasn't actually, the application actually hasn't even been determined around all the criteria around that yet. So that's a difficult question to answer, unfortunately, right now with the information we have at our disposal.
Okay. We probably only have time for one more. I'm just trying to, okay. I think for our last one, if I'm unable to use the CEWS as our company cannot continue to pay the full salaries or wages for the waiting period, are my options to try to keep our staff versus what are my options trying to keep our staff versus just laying everyone off?
I love that that's the last question. And I think, you know, this is really, I think this is really what's happening with everybody. Not every cash flow is an issue. And so without knowing when that money is going to start to roll in, it makes it very, very difficult for business owners to be able just to hold on and just keep paying. This is where you want to, you know, if you're in a situation where you're trying to avoid temporary layoff, this is where you'd look at options like potential reduction. Maybe there's options around people might be willing to go, you know, look at part-time options. But if there's deferral wages that you can look at by keeping your employees on, that would be something I would be looking at doing in this situation, if you can afford that, and or looking at if people are willing to go part-time for a period during this period. Some people might be able to, but those are some of your options right now in terms of trying to reduce, I guess, your payroll. By keeping people on payroll is how you ensure that you can access this wage subsidy. If you have to start to lay people off because, listen, you have no choice, then you may have to do that. But then if you can start to pull people back or recall people earlier because then you can action the wage subsidy, then that would be a great benefit as well. But if you're able to start with the reduction or deferral wages, I think that's, you know, I think that would be a great start.
Thank you so much, Darci. I think, yep, that was our last question. And we really, really appreciate everyone's time today. On behalf of the CPSA, Darci, thank you so much for all of this amazing content. We know that there are so many announcements being made so frequently. So to have this all put together in today's presentation is so valuable. So thank you so much. And to everybody who joined today, thank you so much for being part of this. And we hope that this was valuable for all of you. We hope everybody has a good day.
That's great. Thank you, Rupelin. And I just wanted to say to everybody, listen, I know that if there's other questions, please feel free to, on my you'll get a copy of this presentation plus the recording, I believe, Rupelin, you mentioned that. And certainly if there are other questions or you are something we couldn't get to, then on my website there's you can certainly pop me a note, and please feel free to do so. I appreciate that these are difficult times, and we need to be a resource to one another throughout this period. So our community is small, so we just need to make sure that we stay together through it. So please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help in any way.
Darci, maybe if you could give everyone your website one more time.
Sure, it's www.hrcompass.ca.
Perfect. And yes, and for everyone asking about the presentation, you will receive, as an attendee, you will receive the PowerPoint presentation as well as a recording of this webinar. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Darci.